Are you running a Proxmox cluster and feeling like you're spending way too much time wrestling with network configurations?
Yeah, or maybe as your setup grows, you're just wondering, is there a smarter way, a less, time-consuming way to handle it all?
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really zeroing in on Proxmox Software Defined Networking SDN.
Mm-hmm.
And we're exploring why, well, maybe ignoring it, sticking to the old ways, might be costing you more than you realize.
It's such a common place to be, isn't it?
Hmm.
You've likely got your Proxmox environment humming along using, well, traditional networking.
Right, the usual VLANs configured host by host, maybe some bridges manually created.
Exactly. Each node kind of its own little island network-wise. And look, it gets the job done. Or it seems to at
They
first.
think, why change if it ain't broke?
Precisely. Why bother changing something that works?
And that's really the core of what we're digging into today. While that familiar, hands-on approach feels comfortable.
It can give you a sense of control, yeah.
But we're going to explore why it could actually be hindering your performance, maybe even weakening your security, and definitely impacting how efficiently you scale.
And how you manage the whole thing day to day.
Our goal here is to uncover those, say, hidden costs and really highlight the advantages of maybe embracing Proxmox SDN.
So let's maybe paint a quick picture of where a lot of users probably are right now.
Okay.
You've got your cluster, maybe a few servers, and on each one, you've manually gone in, set up the VLANs, configured the virtual switches, the bridge interfaces in Proxmox.
Tweak the network interfaces.
Right, it's all very manual, very server by server.
And there's a certain satisfaction there. I get it. You set it up. It works. VMs talk. Services are up. Feels like you're in control.
Absolutely. But as we've seen, that direct control can actually become a bit of a liability later on.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. What happens when you need to add, say, another server or move a busy VM?
Or just onboard a new team member who needs to understand the network setup.
Right. It suddenly gets complicated.
Precisely. What starts out seemingly organized can quickly become, well, a tangled mess as you grow. The old way really relies on you, the admin, keeping everything perfectly consistent across every single node.
It's all down to the human element.
It is, which means it's prone to human error. Every single time there's a change or something's added, or even just when someone's trying to figure out what's already there.
And let's be real, who hasn't lost an afternoon trying to figure out why a VM just dropped off the network after a simple migration?
Oh, yeah. Or why that new server just won't see the right VLANs.
Those debugging sessions.
Hmm.
Chase mismatched VLAN IDs, broken bridges, weird downtime. It's that human risk in repetitive tasks across lots of machines.
And this is exactly the problem Proxmox SDN was designed to solve. It's engineered for these scaling challenges, for these operational headaches.
It's about bringing a centralized sort of organized approach, right? But without adding crazy complexity.
Exactly right. Think of it as control without the chaos.
Okay, let's unpack that centralized control bit. One analogy I saw was pretty good. Instead of setting up VLANs on each server individually.
You define them once.
Yeah.
Just once,
Hmm.
at the cluster level.
Uh-huh. And that single definition, it just applies automatically to all the servers.
That's the core idea. It's a fundamental shift. You stop managing individual bits on each host and start managing logical networks across the whole environment.
And the user-friendliness aspect, how does that play out?
Well, that's quite compelling too. When you connect a VM to a network, instead of typing in a VLAN tag, that number.
Like VLAN 105 or whatever.
Right. Instead of that, you just pick from a list of named virtual networks. They call them vnets.
Ah, okay. So instead of remembering 105 as webfront, you literally just pick webfront from a dropdown?
Exactly. And Proxmox SDN handles the underlying VLAN tagging, configuring the bridges, all that stuff automatically across all the right servers.
That sounds significantly less error-prone.
It is, and the benefits go beyond just simple VLAN management. SDN also brings in things like VNet-based firewalls, role-based access control RBAC.
And network zones too, right?
Yes, zone definitions. These add layers of control and security that are just much harder to manage effectively with the old, decentralized way.
Which brings us to, well, the real costs of not adopting SDN. Sticking with the traditional method, it's not just little annoyances, is it?
No, absolutely not. We're talking real risks and a serious drain on your time.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's start with what one source called misconfiguration hell.
Yeah, Sounds about right.
When you're manually setting things up node by node, the chance for error is just huge.
Yeah.
A simple typo in a VLAN ID, forgetting a bridge interface.
Which is like the virtual switch connecting the VM.
Exactly. Or even just inconsistent naming. Any of that can break VM connectivity, cause migrations to fail. Big problems from small mistakes.
And the contrast with the SDN here is pretty stark. You define it once, centrally.
And it's applied consistently, everywhere. Add a new node, it just inherits the config like magic almost, compared to setting it up from scratch.
Okay, then there's scaling. Imagine needing to add, I don't know, 5 new servers quickly.
Without SDN, that's a lot of repetitive manual work on every single new machine.
More time, more effort.
And crucially, way more opportunities to make a mistake. Adding 5 nodes could genuinely mean 5 times the effort and a much, much higher risk of getting something wrong.
And that time spent clicking around in GUIs or editing config files, it's time not spent on something more valuable, right?
Absolutely. SDN gives you that cluster-wide agility. You can scale faster, much faster, and with far less risk of things going sideways due to configuration drift.
Let's talk security. That's another big area.
Huge. With traditional setups, you often have to grant fairly broad admin rights just to manage VLANs on individual servers.
Which exposes sensitive network settings more widely than maybe you'd like.
Exactly. And simple tagging mistakes can accidentally expose traffic between VLANs that should be separate, or create pathways you never intended, security holes waiting to happen.
But SDN offers a more granular approach with the role-based access control.
Right. RBAC tied to specific SDA zones means you can delegate VNet management without giving away the keys to the kingdom, the full host admin privileges.
So better separation of duties.
Much better. Tighter security overall. The person managing the webfront VNet doesn't need access to the physical NIC settings on every host, for example.
That makes a lot of sense, following that principle of least privilege.
Precisely. Then there's VM migration. Should be seamless, right?
Ideally, yeah. Click, move, done.
But if your network settings aren't perfectly consistent across nodes, which is easy to happen manually, migrations can just fail.
Or worse, they look like they succeed.
Exactly, the silent failure. The migration finishes, but the VM has no network connection on the new host.
Nightmare scenario. You only find out when users start complaining.
Right. SDN abstracts that control plane. It ensures the VLANs, the bridges, they're consistent everywhere, so migrations become far more reliable. The VM keeps its full network context.
Okay, and one more point that seemed quite practical. Just naming things.
Yeah, basic organization and clarity. Managing networks by numbers, VLAN 105, VLAN 210. It's not intuitive at all, is it?
No, you end up needing cheat sheets or spreadsheets just to remember what's what.
Which quickly becomes a documentation burden and another place for errors to creep in.
Well, SDN lets you use actual names.
Yes. Logical, human-readable names like web servers, database backend, internal MGMT, whatever makes sense.
That immediately improves clarity, doesn't it? Reduces mistakes when assigning networks.
Massively. And it makes the whole setup easier to understand, troubleshoot, and document. It just brings order to the chaos.
Now, I can hear some listeners thinking, okay, but my setup works. It's been fine for years.
And that's a totally fair point. Many people have traditional setups that have served them well.
We have to acknowledge that. The existing setup has worked.
Absolutely. But, what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow, especially as things change.
Like what kind of changes?
Team growth, adding more nodes, maybe more clients, stricter compliance rules, higher security expectations. All these things put strain on those manual processes.
So that carefully managed manual setup could become a bottleneck or fragile.
It really could. And the key point here isn't always about ripping everything out immediately.
Right. It's more about replacing the manual process with something that will scale.
Exactly. It's about future-proofing. Replacing the part that won't scale effectively or securely as your needs inevitably grow.
And beyond just fixing those core issues, SDN unlocks some extra capabilities, right? Bonus features.
It does. There are some pretty powerful advanced things you might be missing out on.
Okay, like what? First one was VXLAN support.
Right. Now, VXLAN, in simple terms, lets you stretch your layer 2 network or your local networks across layer 3 boundaries. Across routers, essentially.
So why is that cool? What does it let you do?
Well, think about having VMs in different physical data centers that need to act like they're plugged into the same switch.
Ah, okay. Like a geographically dispersed local network.
Exactly. Or building isolated private cloud setups without super complex routing underneath. VXLAN creates this virtual network overlay. It's a real game changer for certain architectures.
Got it. Then there were private VLANs. That sounded useful for multi-tenant situations or high security zones.
Definitely. Private VLANs let you isolate VMs within the same traditional VLAN.
So even if they're on the same network segment, they can't necessarily talk directly to each other.
Precisely. You can stop direct VM to VM communication. Super useful for separating customers in shared hosting or locking down sensitive systems internally. Limits lateral movement if there's a breach.
Okay, that's clever. Prevents cross-contamination between tenants.
Yep. And then looking ahead, there's the promise of zone-based firewalls at the cluster level.
That sounds like it could simplify firewall management quite a bit.
It really could. The idea is granular traffic control between your different VNets, all managed centrally in the SDN interface.
So no more manual IP-duals rules on every single host.
That's the goal. Centralized policy, consistent enforcement. It's still developing, but it shows where things are heading for Proxmox network security.
Now, a potential worry. SDN sounds advanced. Is it stable? Is it experimental?
That's a common concern, but it's important to clarify. Proxmox SDN isn't brand new. It's been around, it's developed.
Okay.
And specifically, the VLAN-based zones, the core stuff we've been talking about, the central management, named vnets, that's considered stable, production-ready.
So you don't need to use the absolute cutting-edge fabric types to get the main benefits.
Not at all. Sticking with VLAN zones gives you that central control, the automation, the scaling benefits, all on a solid, well-tested foundation. You're not being an early adopter just by using basic SDN features.
That's reassuring. It lets you leverage the power without feeling like you're on the bleeding edge.
Exactly. Which brings us to who should really be using this?
And the consensus seems pretty clear, right? If you have more than one Proxmox host.
You should seriously consider it. If you're just running a single server, okay, maybe the benefits aren't as dramatic. But for any kind of cluster,
Or if you manage multiple networks, different teams, tenants.
then yes, sticking purely to traditional networking starts to look increasingly risky and inefficient. The bigger and more complex your setup gets, the more SDN pays off.
More nodes equals more chances for manual errors, basically.
That's a big part of it. The costs of not using SDN scale up with your environment.
Okay, let's do a quick recap then. The potential costs, the downsides of ignoring Proxmox SDN.
Sure, you're looking at a higher risk of misconfiguration.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Slower, more complex scaling when you need to grow.
Limited, potentially less secure access control for network stuff.
VM migrations that might be unreliable or error-prone.
And fundamentally just missing out on simpler, clearer network management overall.
It's quite a list when you put it all together.
It is. And while, yeah, there's a learning curve,
Always is with new tech.
but the time saved long term, the reduced risk, the efficiency gains, it makes a strong case for biting the bullet.
I liked that question one source posed. Instead of asking why use SDN, maybe ask, why am I still doing this the hard way?
That really flips the perspective, doesn't it?
It does. And the suggestion for getting started seems practical too.
Yeah, just enable SDN in a test VLAN zone, create a couple of named VNets, play around with it safely.
Get a feel for it without breaking anything critical.
Exactly. You might just find yourself wondering why you waited so long, because once you start using it, it stops being a buzzword and becomes a really valuable tool.
Well, this has certainly been an illuminating deep dive into Proxmox SDN.
Definitely a lot to think about there.
And it leads us to our final thought for you today. As virtual environments get more complex and demands for speed, scale, and security keep rising, what's the real long-term cost of sticking with a purely manual, server-by-server network approach in Proxmox?
We hope this discussion gave you a solid foundation on Proxmox SDN's value. We'd really encourage you to check out the official Proxmox docs and maybe, like we said, spin up a test zone, see those benefits for yourself.